Good afternoon and welcome to Examining a Vendor Data Center and Colocation Model, a three-part webinar series. Today we are going to have part 3, Keys to Thriving in a Colocation Environment, Making Your Marriage Work. This is a webinar tweet chat combo from healthsystemcio.com, sponsored by Iron Mountain. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the editor-in-chief of healthsystemcio.com, and I will be your moderator today. We are having a simultaneous tweet chat hosted by Kate Gamble, our managing editor and director of social media. You can participate in a separate browser or on your phone by using the hashtag HSCIOchat, or you can simply view the tweet chat in the media viewer panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You can also use the Q&A panel today to submit your questions as they occur to you. We'll take those later in the program, but leave the default set to all panelists when you send them in. And you can download the deck using the URL on your screen. It's being sent out in the chat box, and you can grab that when you get a chance. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time, today we're going to go about 30 to 35 minutes with our panel discussion, featuring Chuck Podesta, CIO at UC Irvine Health, Art Ream, Senior Director of IT Applications and Chief Information Security Officer with the Cambridge Health Alliance, and Chris Bair, VP of Iron Mountain Data Centers. So without further delay, let's jump right in. Chuck, can you give us an overview of your organization and role?
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. Again, Chuck Podesta, I'm the CIO, UC Irvine Health, which is part of the University of California system. So there's 5 academic medical centers, UCLA, UC Davis, UC Irvine certainly, UC San Diego, and UC San Francisco. And so we've come together and are working on a data center strategy which involves co-location and getting rid of all of our kind of disparate data centers that we have amongst the 5 of us. And so we'll be definitely talking more about that today. So thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Chuck. Art?
Yeah, my name is Art Ream. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer and Senior Director of IT Applications at Cambridge Health Alliance. Cambridge Health Alliance is a vibrant, innovative health system which resides in the communities of Cambridge, Mass., Somerville, Mass., and Metro North areas with several primary care, specialty, and emergency services in those areas, as well as a large cohort of behavioral health and acute care hospitals.
Excellent. Thank you. Chris?
I'm Chris Bair. I am with Iron Mountain Data Center Group, and I'm responsible for the product here. We've got about 2 million feet of data center capacity in 11 markets on 3 continents, and it's basically set up for highly regulated organizations, and we offer what we kind of call a colocation offering as well as wholesale data center space.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. All right, looking forward to our talk. This, as I said, is the 3rd part of our series, and in the first 2 parts we talked about selecting a colocation vendor, doing the contracting, and migrating. So this is about what comes next. So when migration is finished, how can the new relationship between hospital and vendor best be described? Is it like a marriage? Art?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about your relationship with your data center provider, you have to be on the same page, or at least have the ability to have a symbiotic relationship between the 2 of you, because they're hosting the larger part of your entire infrastructure. And being on the same page, having a good relationship, an open dialogue, and a regular scheduled discussion period each week or month or however frequently you need that to vet out changes and or needs that you ultimately will come up against is a very important part of the relationship. And it's the communication and planning have to be understood on both sides and should be understood up front by both entities.
Very good. Chuck?
Yeah, I think, when you describe the marriage aspect of it, I think the only difference in my mind is that typically you don't go into a marriage planning the divorce. But in this type of relationship you do. You have to have planned the divorce up front as part of the contract, and we talked about that in the previous session, so I won't get into the details. But assuming you plan that divorce, then the goal is moving forward is not to have that divorce, is to keep that partnership going and keeping the marriage going. And I agree with what Art was talking about. It's really important that the vendor that you're truly aligned and they understand our mission and our overall goals as an organization, as a system. And you've got to maintain that routine cadence with that vendor. You can't just, you sign the contract, you're done, you get a report once a month. You've got to have that monthly or quarterly review around the SLAs and the metrics. Also talk about the future state and, looking out 6 months, looking out a year with that vendor, making sure they understand kind of where your organization is going strategically. Are you buying another hospital? Are you adding more practices? What does that all look like? And to me, from a partnership standpoint, once they understand that, then the vendor can come back and talk about where they're going as an organization as well, because they're not static or stagnant. And so hopefully that you're moving in that right direction together so that you're never in that situation where you've got to, pull the divorce trigger.
And maybe it's better described as a celebrity marriage where they kind of have a lot of money and they need a prenup and they expect to get divorced. So they think about it ahead of time. All right. Celebrity marriage. Very good. Next question. Let's go with you on this, Chris. What does being a good vendor look like in this area? What does that mean to be a good vendor?
I think a lot of it, got covered in kind of the good marriage, right? I think a thing that we all might initially underestimate is the importance of scheduled, regular communications. And it kind of comes back to that marriage thing, right? You get so busy being married and running around with your kids, whatever's happening in your life, that you don't kind of get the us time, with your significant other. I think we get busy in what we do, and when you don't have that regular cadence, you miss the ability to kind of, forward plan, talk about this, and even bring up little things before they become, medium or big things. I think you obviously need kind of the foundational stuff. You got to be reliable. You got to be predictable. It's funny is you want to be super transparent to kind of, the IT infrastructure team or whomever you normally interface with. And then you'd like to be invisible to the larger organization, just like I think most data center operators internally do. It's like a good data center day is a very quiet day for the larger org.
Yeah, Chris, sometimes we know with any type of service provider, we can be calling that service provider with an issue, and we can get someone on the phone who's just totally great and really into helping us and patient and all that kind of thing. You call the same company, you might get a different person who's completely the opposite. How do you avoid that as a provider? I mean, I guess that's just an issue of hiring and making sure you have good people so there's a consistency of service.
Yeah, there's consistency of service, there's culture, right, there's training and all that. And again, this is speaking for everybody. The only time I think that a good person, like assuming that like most organizations, you want to have good employees, I think sometimes when you can get tough communications is when somebody's, dealing with an incident, right? And maybe it's the customer you're talking to, maybe it's somebody else. And so one of the things that we do and others do for sure is when there is a potentially customer impacting event happening, you segment people, right? And so you've got one group of folks that can continue to talk to people and kind of do workman-like work, and then you're letting other members of the team go out and address the issue. And I think that's probably similar to what happens internally with most IT teams. But that's a lot of it too. Just set your people up for success and don't make them try to be good customer service people while they're also, again, dealing with a critical problem potentially.
Art, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with both of them with that regard. It can be somewhat difficult, across the board for, the two entities to work together. But, I don't think I have anything additional to add to either one of them. I kind of agree with both sides of that.
Yeah.
Chuck, go ahead, Chuck, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so, I mentioned it before in the last question around that routine cadence with the vendor and understanding where they're going as a business. And so the only thing I would add is that I really watch for that, because I want my colocation vendor to have that be their main offering as a service. I don't want them going into the restaurant business or, being just, but other types of things. So if they come to me in a quarterly meeting saying, hey, where are you guys going in the next year or two? And they say, well, we're going to buy this restaurant or we're going to do this and move that. That's the stuff that worries me, because now they're getting away from their core competencies. So, as part of that marriage, that's what I would start to watch for, is they sticking to the knitting, starting to move different directions, which would be a concern.
Well, that's a very interesting point.
We did, Anthony, we did have one occasion where we got notified that our vendor was going to look at purchasing a generator division in order to supply their individual institutions. So in other words, they would bring it in as a division of the company, which, much to Chuck's comment right there, I don't know as if I would want that. You know what I mean?
Really?
Go ahead,
it certainly sounds more related than restaurants, but so why did it concern you?
Well, you think not that any one of the providers would actually, cause any issues, but if you have your generator, vendor the same as your co-location vendor, and they've got the relationship to apply all the emergency power, you would hope that there was best practice between the two of them, and you almost get to that sense, or at least you get to that uneasy feeling that they are in bed with each other, and that if something's kind of wonky on the generator side, the other part's not going to put them in check. When you have that division, it's just like user access. When you have the division of duties, nobody can give administrative rights unless somebody else signs off on that. I look at it like that. The division of, the division of duties, when we look at user access in IT, you'd want that there from services, core services, in my opinion.
Chris, I'd love to hear you weigh in on this.
It's interesting. I haven't thought about it from a generator perspective, but I'll be a little bit of the bitter old man that I am, and say that as a certainty. Oftentimes, when it's a vendor, let's say we have good relationship with our generator vendors. You can hold people pretty accountable, right? And even if we made an acquisition like that, and it's not us that he was talking about, but if we did something like that, my worry would be that you go from being a customer, which is held hopefully in pretty high regard, to being internal, and sometimes you don't get the response that a customer does, right? Even though you're an internal customer. So I could see concerns there on something like that for sure.
Okay, very interesting. Love it when we go off on these little side roads. The next question, Chuck, let's go with you on this. What post-implementation gotchas should health systems work to avoid?
Yeah, so on the gotcha side, I would say, again, I just mentioned one would be, you align yourself somebody that all of a sudden starts to move in different directions and move away from their core competency. So it's hard to contract for that, but, it's something that you can constantly bring up in the, the monthly or quarterly meetings that you have, and making sure you're staying aligned, with the vendor on their services that they're providing. I think that the other gotcha would be, big picture gotcha would be just not paying attention. You're moving on, maybe you're implementing other systems, and you check the box that now you're co-locating. It's the vendor's problem to manage this stuff, and you don't have any responsibility in it anymore. If it goes down, you have that in the contract, and you can call them up and they'll fix it, or there's issues, things like that. But you have to be an active participant. On our side, we have to, the systems that connect, we have to keep our networks, upgraded. And so it's a keeps the lights on type of approach that we have to have, and keep moving forward with things that connect to the co-location side. Otherwise, we're not holding up our end of the bargain because there's other parts of technology that, aren't involved in co-location but connect to it that need to be, top-notch all the time. So that's our responsibility, is be an active participant, looking at those SLAs and the reports on a regular basis, meeting on a regular basis. We need to push that, wait for the vendor to say, we have to have a meeting, or, or a quarterly meeting, or whatever it might be. So be much more proactive. And I see that in a lot of places where we have this, outsourced. Well, not everything's outsourced. So, and even in an outsourced state, you're still responsible, for managing it.
Very good, Art.
Yeah, I have to agree with Chuck. You can find yourself, it's almost out of sight, out of mind, and then you become complacent, and then you become a little bit less engaged, and if everything's running along smooth and everything's going pretty well, I mean, it's easy to get, distracted into other parts of the world of your infrastructure that's not up there, and then that relationship, I don't want to say sours, but it just, you lose the connection and you use the pulse on what's going on, even though it is hosting most of your infrastructure. And you start to walk away and it almost becomes out of sight, out of mind, like I said, and then something happens and then it becomes in the forefront that maybe could have been addressed, had the regular engagement happened on a regular basis and we hadn't been so complacent. So I think that's the post-implementation and keeping that active dialogue of where the company's going, what they're providing you, what new services they're going to market new services as well. But when it's the status quo or the existing level of service, you have to, keep that engagement up to understand what's going on up there and what you can take advantage of.
Very good. Chris?
I think across most industries, it's kind of pre and post, this one straddles a little bit. I see organizations really struggle with the management of capacity, right? And a lot of times the inclination will be to over-purchase, right, relative to what sort of their near and medium term requirements are. And oftentimes it's because they've looked at historic growth rates, right, which have been, 10, 15% a year, whatever they've seen. And they're not sure how to kind of leaven in what the cloud's impact's going to be. And then they also oftentimes, and sometimes the vendors like us will encourage it too, but they'll think about a pretty long term, a term that contemplates 2, 3, 4 equipment refresh cycles, which also makes kind of that capacity planning difficult and might be something that you don't do, right? Like if hey, here's our hardware for the next 3 years, then maybe you think about a 3-year relationship, right? Or have some optionality in the agreement after 3 years. So that just seems like it's very difficult at any point to predict the future, but really around infrastructure now with all the change in industry, I think it's particularly hard. And I see folks really just kind of spend a lot of time trying to figure out something that they can't possibly perfect. So.
Chris, Art and Chuck both mentioned the idea of staying involved as a customer. As the provider of those services, what do you, and we have a question on this later, but maybe we will have answered it by then. What do you think is a best practice? What do you want from your customers? What level of engagement do you want? I mean, you don't want to call on you every 5 minutes, but I would imagine you want customers that are involved as opposed to those that have totally checked out. It's like a system. It's like if you're selling an EMR, the smart vendors make sure you're using it well and using a lot of its features. So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think, and it's fun, as we've been talking, all of us have been talking a lot about, lots of transparency, scheduled cadence, whether it's a quarterly review, things like that. I think scheduling those, keeping them on there, showing up, having good, a good, candid relationship, right? If something's tough, bring it up. And if something's going well, give people, an attaboy or an attagirl for, hey, this went well, thank you. Just like you would in any relationship, I really do think brings a lot. And then the operations teams and engineering teams that support you, the better they get to know you as people, that helps because we're social animals. And when you're not an invisible email or person on the phone or work order, it just helps them understand you, and they have a better nuanced kind of feeling for what you want and can really understand and kind of move quicker, just like any other relationship where you got better familiarity. So I do think as much as it is kind of a real estate offering we have, I think the service and the relationship part is really important because, you know, you have your most important IT assets inside of somebody else's place. And so we've got physical security responsibility, we've got that real estate and engineering responsibility, but ultimately if we can't be really effective in communications in good times and during tough times, it's tough to be successful for both parties.
Very good points. Very good. All right. And as I ask you questions as we go on, you're going to find that you've covered some of this stuff, but feel free to add anything new or reiterate anything you'd like to. All right, let's go with you on this one. What is the hospital's responsibility post-migration?
I mean, the hospitals, obviously, after you do your migration, you know, I firmly believe that you need to keep in mind and monitor your throughputs and your pipes going up and back and your metrics. We fell into a little bit of a loop there to where we had a couple of our feeds coming back and forth, and this is purely mostly technical and less contractual, that, you know, we thought we had it configured correctly along with the service provider, but there was some lag times in there. So we didn't measure. We measured before when we had it on-prem. We measured kind of afterwards, but didn't keep up on that. And then we saw a little bit of degradation in service. So then when we finally started to pay a little bit more attention to that, we focused a little bit more on the application than we did the actual infrastructure. So it's easy to get clouded. Oh, we got a class, you know, data center. We got huge pipes going up there. It can't possibly be that. And, you know, it could have to be the vendor for the application or the EHR. So that was one of the traps that you know, you got to keep up your monitoring. You got to keep active on the infrastructure. And I think that was our biggest pitfall from that perspective, from a hospital's perspective. We had the latest and greatest of everything, and we thought everything is okay, and it's easy to fall into that trap. So I think it's important to actually monitor your metrics, monitor your your infrastructure that's going back and forth, and really kind of pay attention to the nuances of that. Even though after an implementation we all have it in the back of our heads, since we change something big, we need to pay attention. Sometimes we can fall out of into the trap that we actually don't.
Very good, Chuck.
It's very similar. I agree with Art. You know, I'll give you an example. We have here between UCI and San Diego as well. We're both on the same instance of Epic, and it's hosted by Epic. So we get, so you can kind of call that colocation for the EHR, but we get monthly reports from Epic on a variety of different things around latency and things that Art talked about, and around the SLAs as well. But it's been interesting because a lot of this stuff is in techno speak, and unless you're a CTO and work in that area, it's very difficult to understand the report. And we'd like to, you know, as part of this is, even though it's not something that typically you bring to the C-suite as an update. Of course, they want an update on how Epic's running, but, you know, that co-location is a big part of how your EHR is performing. And if there's slowdowns and latency and things like that, that could go back to the network, that could go back to the hosting organization. So part of those monthly reports now, we put those in layperson's terms now, so that we can send the report out to others besides just in the IS area, the IT area, where you need to have that knowledge of what's going on. It's been interesting to translate a lot of this information in something that the C-suite can understand and present, and they want to get involved because it is connected to, you know, the EHR, which is the lifeblood of the organization. But that should be, whether it's EHR or any other applications being co-located on, that's the type of relationship you need to be able to have, so that you can bring that partnered vendor that you have into your organization, but not just into IT, but also, you know, amongst the C-suite as well, so they can understand how that symbiotic relationship works.
Excellent. All right, let's stick with you for a minute, Chuck. What's your best advice and lessons learned regarding managing term renewals?
Say that again, Matt. Managing
term renewals.
Oh, term renewals. Okay, so that's where the divorce comes in, doesn't it? Or at least maybe Maybe there's a separation at that point. But I think those should, if you're really managing, you really have a partnership and you're managing the existing contract, those should be a non-event. They should either be you are getting divorced or you're not and you're going to renew. But in either case, that should not be a surprise to either organization, whether it's our organization or the partner vendor. You should know well ahead of time, based on all the things we just talked about. If you're doing those things, you should know well ahead of time which way you're going to go, whether you're going to get divorced or you're going to, redo your nuptials again. So in my mind, that's what you're working towards, is that non-event. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody when that time hits which direction you're going in.
Art?
Yeah, like Chuck says, you got to look back at the prenup and make sure that we actually had everything straight then, and then we shouldn't have any surprises. You should be on track. You should be ready to renew, or if you're not ready to renew, that's where and you're looking to transition to another player. I mean, those dialogues will start. You got to pay attention to your out clauses, notifications, and we all have obligations to each other. But I've seen where it can actually get a little tense in there when people aren't really right straight up front, and we've had these issues and we've worked through them, but we really haven't. And then ends up being what Chuck said is a surprise. That's never where you want to be at this point in time in the game. So if you're like Chuck says, if you're managing your contract all the way through, it's almost a mood issue at the end. And then if it's a situation of a divorce, this is not one you want to do abruptly. And there's obligations, like I said, both contractual and integrity-wise on both sides to manage that effectively and professionally.
Very good. Art, anything more on actually managing termination or move out?
Managing termination, I mean, most of that is already covered in the contracts of how you're actually going to do that. And provided, you're moving on to another service provider, you're already most likely set up and engaged over there, ready to start a transition before you terminate the contract. But there's that transition stage where you've got now 3 parties that are integrated together to make a smooth transition for the organization. In other words, the new service provider potentially has got to have some conversations with the old ones, and you end up in the middle being the broker between them, and that can be somewhat tense at times, but you just got to manage it, correctly.
Chuck?
Yeah, I just, I agree with what everybody's talking about here on this. It's just, just if you are going to do that divorce, to me, that the planning that's involved to do that, like Art said and others said, it can't be abrupt. And so you have to have another vendor in place. So you're probably looking at, at least 6 months would be even a short period of time between that and your term ending. You're probably looking at a year potentially, depending on how big your colocation footprint is, to get that moved out. So you've got to constantly be focused on that, and especially when you get into that last year. Because I think once you get to probably the 9th or 8th month, what's left in that particular term, if you haven't made the decision, it's almost too late.
Chris, anything on both, managing term renewals and termination issues?
Yeah, there's some really good comments made there. It's interesting because as the provider, right, as a service provider, you're rarely ever surprised that someone renews or doesn't renew if you're doing your job the right way. And a non-renewal isn't usually because, hey, you are failing to keep the lights on and doing your job, right? That would be a really big issue. it's normally because, hey, we've had our EHR on site and we're going to go to a co-located instance of Epic or some other provider, that's off-site. That's typical, and it's not always a non-renewal. It might just be a partial or, just a different structure. But again, if you've done your work and the relationship's good, you're aware of it and you're planning for it, just like you'd be planning for, kind of a more positive event, which is, we just bought a provider as big as we are and we might be growing with you, right? So those things should be coming out. I would say, and this is a little bit of, I know we're talking prenups and all that, which is fun, and I feel like a Kardashian, so it's really exciting. But I would say, and Chuck really just highlighted it, that a lot of times the way you write these co-location agreements are written is either party can introduce change really late, 60 days left, 90 days left in a term. And I always think that's problematic. And I kind of think like, hey, if, a year out, 9 months, 6 months out minimally is when neither of us changes things. And not in a bad way, because anytime before that point, we can say, hey, we want to make a shift here. But I really think that's pretty important to capture in an agreement. I also think that I've seen other organizations, other providers like in the space that we're in, be particularly aggressive to kind of win somebody, but because switching is difficult and switching costs are high, anytime you migrate a data center, internal or third party, I've seen people be surprised by what happens to their rates or flexibility or concessions in a second or a third term. And so I always just tell people, define what you have big windows, have lots of opportunity, lots of clarity, and define what this term would look like, define the maximum changes in the second term, things like that. So you aren't ever felt as if you were kind of held over a barrel, and a good provider will do that with you.
Very good points, very good points. All right, next question, Chuck. What should a health system do if the quality of the vendor's service degrades? And first of all, give me an example or two of how that could happen, what degrading of service looks like, and then what should a health system do?
So an example I would use would be an easy one. Say it's response time for a particular application. If we go back to the EHR example that I used, and there is so that would be one. Another would be uptime of the system. That's probably another SLA that you have in there that are pretty easily tracked and understood. And in your contract, you certainly have that spelled out as to what the remedies are if these SLAs aren't being met, say those two areas. But you kind of want to avoid getting into the contract. To me, the best contracts are you sign it, you put it away, and you pull it out again. And so you never want to be constantly going back to that and seeing what your remedies are. Hopefully you've got that partner relationship where you start to see some issues and you bring those up early and often, and what you want to see in your partner is that they've jumped on those and are resolving those in a equitable fashion. The other thing is I would want my partner vendor for them to bring those things up to me. Mm-hmm. Even if it's something that would benefit me more than it would benefit them, some sort of early warning system that, we're seeing these issues here. We want to notify you of those issues, even though it's our responsibility to fix those issues. To me, that's huge. Not waiting for us to find this stuff, but having our partner come forward, and being transparent about what some of the problems might be.
Art?
Yeah, we ultimately, you have to keep up on, like you said, the degradation of service can happen, the patching, of servers and even smart building stuff. And I think that gets into, more of the security part of this, which is a little bit less than this. But you see over time, like I said, that complacency. Are they keeping up on the infrastructure and the smart building and the patching of the computers that are running the air conditioning and stuff like that, and not only the servers and the infrastructure that you actually have up there, and then the service level agreements back and forth, the reports are coming, and it's on a timely basis. you can see some of those things dropping off on either side. You know, maintenance schedules, some things that are not electronic, you know, that, you know, actually have the integrity of the building and the location. We get regular reports on all of those items, which I think is commonplace, but I think you could see those services degrade depending on, you know, how well the group is doing and your contract is doing.
Let me ask you guys, Chuck and Art, have you ever been in a co-location situation where what degraded was your contact, the individual that you had as your main contact over there changed and not for the better, and that actually affected the relationship? I'm just curious.
Yeah, this is Chuck. I did not here at UCI, but in a previous position company, we were doing some co-location, and yeah, it was a larger company, so there was a lot of movement within that company, and that's an excellent point, because you establish that relationship with that point person. You get to know them, they get to know your organization, and then when that change occurs, there's a ramp-up period for that new person. And yeah, we did have issues because of, you know, we just had such a great relationship with the previous person that it was hard for the new person to live up to those standards. And, you know, even from a personality standpoint. So that was a problem, definitely a problem for us. We went through 2 or 3 before we found somebody that was close to, you know, what we had before. But we still, you know, maintained the relationship. It wasn't enough for us to, you know, pull that divorce trigger.
Right. So you were able to express this new individual is sort of not the right chemistry match for us. Can we get someone else to handle our account? Something like that? Yeah,
because, you know, one of the things you want to do is, and, you know, I haven't mentioned this yet, but you want to have that person visit your organization. You know, it's not just having phone calls and Zoom meetings and things like that to go through SLAs. I want them to come on site occasionally and see our operation and meet with our operational people, you know, meet potentially with some of the C-suite to talk about kind of the relationship on what we're doing. And that requires a certain type of person, not just a technologist, but also somebody who's savvy, you know, in those types of meetings and being able to, you know, translate this technology speak into something that they can understand that I talked earlier about, the report. And that's hard for, you know, that's hard to find that type of person. When you find them, you want to keep them. When you change it out, it becomes much more difficult. If it was just somebody on the other end answering the phone, that'd be a lot easier to replace.
Chris, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, the way I see it, and we were talking about it as a marriage, even a Hollywood celebrity marriage, we talked about the technology, you know, that's sort of the stakes to play. Do you have the good stuff there? Or are you staying on track? Are you devoted to your line of business? And then, we mentioned the individuals there, especially those key people that are dealing with that health system relationship. And when they switch, I would imagine that's something that needs to be monitored by someone above that person. And that health system, as Chuck mentioned, may need a go-to individual to say, this isn't working out. Is there someone else we can get to head up this relationship? What are your thoughts around all that?
I think it's all really good and really relevant, right? And so, assuming, you know, because sometimes you can work with there might be a vendor where it's kind of more of a cult of personality, right? You've got somebody who just has great personality, great individual skill, great institutional knowledge, and if they lose them, it's problematic generally because they're more based on, hey, Joe's a great person or Sally's a great person, but it's less kind of a process, right? And you know, this is kind of how we do it. And as a Denver Broncos fan, as much as I hate to admit it, the New England football team, whose name I cannot say, tends to replace people pretty effectively every year and remain good, except for that other guy I can't mention who plays quarterback. And so, you know, you'd hope that you're less reliant on an individual and more on a system. But even if that's the case, you're still just going to get, you know, we've been talking relationships a lot. It's pretty fun for kind of an IT call. But you're still going to get people that it's not a cultural fit, right? It's just not, we're just not effective communicating with the person, and I really do think that's why you need escalation points and larger awareness between multiple levels of the org in order to go, hey, we're struggling with this new person, or we're struggling with this person in this role that, you know, wasn't there before. And I think, and as crazy as it sounds, sometimes as a vendor, you know, let's say that one of Chuck's folks, you know, has come in and they're not doing anything inappropriate, but it's just we got a lot of grit in the system all of a sudden. It's nice if I can pick the phone up and go, hey, Chuck, I think we got all the good intent in the world over here, but we have some problems in the relationship. What do you think? And it's nice on both sides, you know. And you're not complaining or telling on somebody. You're just saying it's important, this thing that we have, this relationship. Can you help me keep it good? And so I really like for both Chuck and Art, or you know, how they think about this, because it really helps us too, as you can imagine.
Well, I think this is excellent, and I think this is a huge part of getting into this type of a relationship. So I'm glad we're covering it, and I bet you a lot of these conversations don't cover these types of issues. But on a personal level, as you mentioned, Chris, we're social animals, and we've all dealt with this situation where, you know, you get along with someone very well, and the next individual that takes their position just not quite sees things the same way. So I think this is great stuff. Chris, let me stick with you on this next question. I think we touched on this briefly in a previous event. How can the arrangement be structured with enough flexibility to enable shifting workload to the cloud as needs increase?
Yeah, so I think and this kind of hits on that point I was talking about earlier about how hard it is to manage your ultimate capacity over a 3-year period, let alone a 5, 10, 20-year period, right? Like some of these agreements can be. And so I think that if I were coming in, right, and having been kind of on the vendor side for a couple of years now, if I were coming in and thinking about establishing an agreement, I'd want to understand, you know, my initial costs, of course. I'd want to capture my expansion costs and my expansion opportunities, and not just more space, but then not just more power or cooling capacity, et cetera. And then I would want to capture some ability to change my usage, whether it's renewal or whether it's a couple of years in, or, you know, particularly if I know that we're increasingly going cloud first, right? Because I think that that's something that can and does come up fairly frequently. And again, you want to be super efficient. And then if I do need to change my usage, what does that look like physically to me? You know, what do I need to get back, and what will it cost me to do that? And the last thing on it is just to make sure that most providers now, I think, are pretty neutral. And if I need to get access to a cloud provider that is not part of my colocation provider, that's seamless and easy, and there's no obstacles to it, right, and no additional costs and things like that, you know, in order to be able to do it. So I want to make sure I can do it, and then when I do it, what does it look like, and what kind of flexibility do I have over time to manage that transition to ensure that we're being efficient.
All right, very good. I want to go to my favorite new part of our webinars, which is the Ask a Co-Panelist. And I want to start with you, Art. Do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Yeah, I actually have a question for both of them. So, and it's along the lines of the 2 questions ago. Have you ever had the engagement with a client, which we were in this particular position at once, where we saw the degradation of service level with the individual contact at the institution or at the, like Iron Mountain or the service provider. And in hindsight, from our perspective, what we forgot to ask was when we called up the account rep that was managing our account was, hey, does XYZ have anything going on? Because we've noticed an attitude change, a service level change, a responsiveness to us. Have you guys, put more onto the person? They just don't have the time, that type of thing. And come to find out that question, had we actually asked it, would have actually helped the other person out. And I mean that because then, you know, in hindsight, we found out, or they found out, the individual was having some personal problems, didn't want anybody at work to know it, but was postulating towards the, you know, the clients, and could have gotten the help before it got to a problem of a relationship between the two companies. And I think that was, while not our obligation, but as individuals in the relationship, it's important to look at all sides. And, you know, we're responsible for saying, hey, something's not right here. And it may just help somebody out in an indirect way, to where, you know, they go to an employee assistance program, or somebody's not at that institution actually realizing something's going on, and somebody external says, this is not right. So what we ended up having was they got the help they needed and continued on as our rep in a phenomenal way. And it was unrelated to the business or anything like that. It was a personal issue, but it was manifesting itself. And instead of taking a step back and say, hey, this is actually unusual, we ran into that. And, you know, it's still a great relationship till today. And the person got the help that they needed, and that's where it went. So it's not always about business. You know, while it is, you know, sometimes you got to think about the human factor.
Chuck, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I've never had that situation, but it's interesting. I can definitely see, you know, I've had that situation in other areas, but not with, you know, the topic that we're discussing. But, and Chris had mentioned earlier, too, about, you know, if the vendor sees something going on with the point person that we have here that's working with the vendor. So I could see this actually going both ways, where you could have an issue with the vendor, but also have an issue within your own organization that you don't know about, that your vendor, your partner discovers as well. So it's interesting, and if you take it to the next step, I think it's really important, even beyond the relationship between the two organizations, and keeping that moving and helping the person, but as well. But also, when you have disgruntled employees, that can cause problems in other areas, and especially in the technical areas where these people have access to all kinds of stuff and can do all kinds of damage. And so jumping on that quickly, you know, as Art did in his example, I think, yeah, help the person out, but also help the organization out as well in eliminating a potential risk.
Chris?
Yeah, I think it's great points, and we've certainly seen it, you know, on people on our team and with customers. And it's funny, with customers, you can see it sort of like Chuck said, you know, with maybe the, you know, the person kind of who's the implementer. And I've even seen it with, you know, people at the executive level, and a lot of times it's just like, you know, it's just kind of human being stuff. I just go, yeah. I go, hey, Anthony, what's happening, man? Like, you know, again, I'm not trying to overstep. You know, I am a vendor, but what's up in your voice? You doing okay? And it's funny because when you hop off all the business part and they go, you know what? They brought a new guy in here from outside, da 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 da, and this is, you know, and it's like, okay, well, that's okay. Okay, what can we do? How can we help with that? Right? And it's such a basic thing that we forget because we get so excited about systems and Excel reports and all that stuff that it's super important to ultimately remember, especially in this little strange data center business, that they're notwithstanding hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure on both party sides and lots of stress and kind of a zero defect environment, that just make sure we're okay as people. You know, so it's internally we say it's taken from kind of the post 9/11 world, but we go, you know, see something, say something, and then we add do something. You know. And so I think that works great with people and especially customers. It's just kind of a nice, mature way to handle each other.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Art. And my two thoughts, not that anybody asked, was that what you're two things you're talking about are, one is an existing relationship, right, that is at a certain level and has a degradation to it. So, you know, Joe was always great, always call me back, and all of a sudden Joe won't call me back. So there's that change in an existing relationship, and then there's the willingness of you or of any of us that you know, want to do the right thing to give that person the benefit of the doubt because of that previous good service, to assume there's something more going on, and it's not just they've decided not to do a good job anymore. So I think those two things combined, you know, make you want to reach out and see what's up, as Chris mentioned, and say, hey, Anthony, what's wrong with you? And I'll say, listen, I got a lot going on, you know, this and that. Just joking there. All right. Chuck, any questions for your co-panelists?
Yeah, I do have one for Chris, actually. And my question is, what's next? And what I mean by that is that, you know, we touched on it a little bit in previous sessions, you know, the movement to the cloud and you know, potentially shrinking co-locations. And let's assume, you know, in the next 5, 8, 10 years that transition to the cloud is just going to happen more rapidly in healthcare and in other industries as well, and already is. So for the industry itself that you represent and for your company, what are you guys talking about? What's next?
I think it's a good question. I think 10, 12 years ago, there were more providers that sought to kind of be a one-stop shop, and there are advantages to that, right? You know, so you can get some data center, and you can get some cloud, or back then we'd say utility or grid computing, but, you know, same sort of idea, and you can get your network and all these things here. I think we've seen a decrease kind of in the growth of those folks, and some of them have gone away, and you've certainly seen faster growth on organizations that are sort of pure play cloud providers. There's the public giant ones we all know that are great, you know, Amazon, you know, Azure, and the rest. And then you've also seen growth around folks that do it like we do, where you seek to have a very nice and predictable and easy to work in environment. And all of us to a degree, and none of us, I think, dramatically different really than the other ones, really want to make sure and kind of acknowledge that, yes, if customers are coming in here, they're doing it for a reason, and if they're not even on day one needing access to cloud or more typically multi-cloud environments, it's still important that we make that available to them, and not just like in a begrudging way, but we facilitate it, right? Because, you know, to me, anybody that kind of seeks to, you know, still go, this is why the public cloud is bad, I think it's nuts. Right? I mean, it's kind of, to me, like railing against gravity, right? It's a thing, right? And it's here, and it's awfully tough to beat over time. And so we work hard to give customers systems, physical access, et cetera, that lets them continue to access and to refine what they're doing around hybrid deployments with us and multi-cloud strategy.
All right, very good. Just have a few minutes left, so Chris, I want to give you an opportunity to ask your co-panelist question.
Yeah, so what have you done, whether it was ahead of time when you first engaged or over time, how do you handle your right to audit, you know, like your ability to come in and bring your auditors in, as well as remediation and things like that? How do you think about that?
Well, this, Chuck, I mean, the way I think about it is, I'll use the analogy of, you know, let's maybe talk about a little bit about security here, because that's typically what we're going to touch on with some sort of audit. A big part of it is, you know, we're going to have a BAA with you, so as part of that, we're going to come in and audit kind of the physical security, the virtual security, and all those kind of components. Not that we still have a responsibility for security because it's our data, but you have a responsibility as well. So, you know, even though in the analogy I use, even though we have the gun, you know, if you're a gun owner, you have your gun locked up in a safe and it's secure and you're the safe, we're still responsible for keeping that gun safe and in that safe, right? And only taking it out when, you know, it's going to be used responsibly. So we have the right, I think, based on that, owning, you know, that weapon to audit that. And we actually do that with some vendors now, mostly on the cloud-based vendors. We haven't done it with colocation yet, but I can see us moving into that, where when we sign the contract, we actually take the outside company that does our assessments, our HIPAA, our NIST, our FISMA, whatever assessments we have, that they come in on a regular basis and come up with remediation plans around security. And as part of the contract, before we sign the contract, we send them in and have them rate your company with kind of the same yardstick as we're rated at. And we actually can view that report before we sign the contract with that cloud vendor. So I could see that wanting to do that with the co-location vendors as well, being very specific as to the areas that we would want to audit.
Art?
Yeah, sitting in the CISO spot as well over here, often, going in to do an internal audit and taking our team there to do the audit. Oftentimes, frankly, in typical organization is human resources and the ability and the time to do that. I know, some of the audits that I do for HIPAA and in that regard, while it's doing due diligence, oftentimes you're bifurcated across many obligations in those positions. And actually going out and enforcing and doing the audits potentially are not cost effective and or they're time consuming to the point where you can't do them. So that's the struggle that I see, with going in and doing the audit per se.
All right, very good. Well, that is about all we had time for today. When you close out your WebEx window, you're going to be taken to a post-event survey. If you could take a moment to answer that, we'd appreciate it. Regarding continuing education, those of you who hold the CHIME CHCIO certification get 1 CEU for attending our events. So let CHIME know you were here, and if you've asked us to do that, we'll do it. If you need a certificate of attendance for another CEU program, you can use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when our archive recording has been posted to our YouTube channel. And if you'd like us to produce a webinar on the topic of your choice, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox. And please go to our website to view our upcoming schedule. So with that, I want to thank Chuck Podesta, Art Ream, and Chris Bair of Iron Mountain. I want to thank Iron Mountain for sponsoring this 3-part series, all of which will and can be found on our YouTube channel. And I want to thank you, our attendees, for joining our events. With that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.